Good morning. I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning to get to your seats before we start. Good morning and welcome to the May 17th, 2024 SANDAG Transportation Committee meeting. I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. Before we go forward, I would like to ask the interpreter to give us instructions on how to use the interpretation system. Please go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Announcement from the interpreter. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, the world, and select English as your language. If you're joining through the Zoom mobile app from a cell phone, tablet, etc., press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you're in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, el globo terráqueo y seleccione español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom desde su celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de la reunión, favor de pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. I would ask our clerk, Ms. Francesca Webb, to confirm that we have a quorum with a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. We do have a quorum this morning. I'll go ahead and do a roll call for the San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, Rafael Perez.
Here.
For the City of San Diego, Councilmember Campillo.
Here.
For the County of San Diego, Supervisor Montgomery Stepp.
Here.
For East County, Chair Shu.
Here.
For Metropolitan Transit System, Councilmember Moreno.
Present.
For North County Coastal, Vice Chair Kranz.
Here.
And Councilmember Zito.
Present.
For North County Inland, Mayor White.
Present.
And Councilmember Musgrove.
Here.
For North County Transit District, Deputy Mayor Edson.
Present.
The Port of San Diego is absent. And for South County, Councilmember Duncan.
Duncan, present. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the roll call.
Thank you. Before we start public comment, I just want to celebrate or give a shout out or celebration for a successful Bike Anywhere Day yesterday. Last year, we had 7,500 participants. This year, we have over 9,000 participants in Bike Anywhere Day. So it's a very successful day. I'm told that Bike Anywhere Day is actually today nationally. We're, of course, ahead of the rest of the country with having it done yesterday. I had the pleasure of visiting 7 pit stops in East County, and it was great to see so many volunteers and riders yesterday. We'll go ahead and go on to item number one, non-agendized public comment. Before we take public comment, let me give some instructions and reminders. As a reminder, no comments shall be loud, threatening, profane, or abusive language that disrupts the orderly conduct of the meeting will be tolerated. Any such language or any other disorderly conduct that disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of the committee meeting is prohibited. Per SANDAG board policy, the amount of time allowed for each verbal public comment is determined based on the number of agenda items, the complexity of those items, the number of persons anticipated to offer comments. This allows us to hear from as many people as possible and to complete our business while we still have a quorum. Based on those factors for today's meeting, and given the longer agenda and each item longer agenda, each member of the public will be allowed 1 minute for their comments. So with that, Francesca, do we have any members of the public that wish to make comments?
Thank you, Chair. We do. We have two speakers in the room that I'll call on first, and then I'll go to Zoom. Our first speaker will be Robert German, followed by Dan Summers.
Good morning. I just want to make sure. 1 minute?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to use this as a meet and greet. I'm going to start coming here more often. My name is Robert German. I represent, we have a network with all the groups in San Diego County that are regarding aviation, the airports. My group is Citizens Against Gillespie's Expansion, low-flying aircraft. Born and raised here. I've worked on I worked construction my whole life. I'm encouraged that we have an air traffic controller in the mix. That's great. That's one of the main reasons I'm coming. And I will try and come and give you something new every time. The two projects that I'm interested in is, first of all, the airports need to be under SANDAG's control, like the State Commission has recommended. And two, I believe Miramar is the place for spending our limited funds for a seamless transportation center. That means railroad, trolley, that means people mover, and of course, aircraft.
Thank you. Your time has expired. Our next speaker will be Dan Summers, and then we will go to Alex Wong on Zoom.
Good morning, Chair and members. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Dan Summers. I'm from the Ramona Community Planning Group. I'm here to talk about the 67 corridor. The issue is evacuation. The problem is bottlenecks. The cause of the bottlenecks is multiple lane configurations between Highland Valley Road in Ramona and Scripps Poway Parkway in Poway. In those 7.8 miles, there are 2, 3, and 4 lane segments causing bottlenecks during an evacuation, which occurred in both the 2003 and 2007 fire congregations. The common sense solution, we believe, is converting those 2 and 3 lane segments into 4 lanes so that the 50,000 people who live in Ramona and all the neighboring communities can evacuate in case of an emergency.
Thank you. Your time has expired.
Thank you for that time.
Our next speaker will be Alex Wong, who will be followed by Blair Beekman.
As state researcher for RideSD, I strongly support the automated people mover to connect downtown with the airport and beyond. The people mover is the ultra-frequent automated rail service that will transform San Diego into a transit city. From Copenhagen to Vancouver, automated rail systems have catalyzed sustainable transit-oriented development. Last June, I visited Lille, France, which has a metropolitan area population less than half of San Diego County. But their subway, which uses automated people mover technology, boasts over twice the ridership of San Diego's trolley. Why? Because of frequency. Using my phone's stopwatch, I found that trains in each direction came every 85 seconds during rush hour. That made the subway extremely convenient. I never had to hurry to catch the train because even if I missed the train, there'd be another train in 85 seconds. San Diegans deserve the same world-class convenience. It's time for SANDAG to join the automated rail revolution as soon as possible by building an elevated people mover, which will be much faster and cheaper to build than a tunneled option.
I think our next speaker will be Blair Beekman, who will be followed by the original draw.
Hi, Blair Beekman. Thanks for the meeting today. Thank you for the work of SANDAG that it's helped develop in me the idea that if we work on openness and accountability and transparency at the local level, it creates concepts of open participatory democracy and ideas of peace here at the local level. We have to work towards those things to accomplish good goals. And when we do, that creates awesome examples for the world, for the Middle East and for the Ukraine area. We can do really good work by practicing good practices of openness and accountability here. And with that said, good luck on items with the latest issues of, dealing with issues like Highway 125 issues, that you work towards openness and accountability, and not just between yourselves, but then to bring that to the public through things like agenda items, through things like social media, that you're explaining the process better and more clearly to each other and to the community, and learn how to ask community to give back and ask their opinion and feel comfortable with that. And that's growth.
Thank you. Your time has expired. Our next speaker will be the original draw. You can go ahead.
Yeah, as we have a border invasion going on, all of you need to be aware of what is happening. We have military-aged men and foreign military men crossing the border and dropping off their dog tags. Muslim military, Abu Bakr Sadiq Salah is his name. He dropped it off at the border wall, and it should be concerning when there are a bunch of other men and women that are coming across and leaving their IDs, destroying them, making sure that there's no remnant of who they are, so that they can come and disappear, and who knows what that means. But we've already had a little girl be raped. You guys need to be very concerned and understand that what is happening is it's an invasion. When we have foreign military that is crossing the border, that should be a concern, especially when you guys are concerned about things like another 9/11 happening. But we're all complicit. You're all complicit in that right now, and you need to change your ways, because this is not only treason, but this is an invasion, and it should be very concerning to you to have foreign military dropping off their dog tags at the border wall.
That concludes the public commenters.
Thank you. Do we have any comments from any committee members or staff? If seeing no hands up, let's go on to the consent calendar. Do we have anyone that wants to pull any items from the consent calendar? Seeing no hands up. Do we have any public commenters on consent calendar?
Thank you, Chair. We do. The original draw, you can go ahead, and then the original draw will be followed by Blair Beekman.
Yeah, in the minutes, as I was telling you last time about what's been going on at the border, and you guys don't take it very seriously. There's stuff going on at Irish Transit that I was telling you about. There's even, Chinese mafia that's there, and they are doing business, illegal business there. They're trafficking humans, and I just find it very concerning that we can, give them free transportation when we have children that are riding the transit for free, unaccompanied, when we have military from foreign nations invading our border. I don't understand how that's not a concern to you guys. I don't understand how you think that this is just a asylum seeking thing when most all of them are not seeking asylum. You have to understand that I'm covering the border, and you guys are you're not even there. You don't see it. The news doesn't tell you. I have been telling you guys this, and now I'm telling you that there are military men crossing, invading. It should be concerning, and you should do something about it.
Our next speaker will be Blair Beekman. You can go ahead.
Hi, Blair Beekman. Good luck to how we can address ideas of accountability and that we can be open with ourselves. And our words can be difficult sometimes, but we can trust how to work out ways to consider our words. And that's good that's a good relationship of a community. And it doesn't have to be a hostile connection. It's difficult, but good luck how we can make the connection of thoughts and ideas and worries and concerns. With that said, thank you. That with this kind of a summary of the agenda today is going to be about the future of funding issues. And you're trying to get your house in order and how to talk about the future of your funding issues and funding dollars. Thank you. That's accountability. We need to do that after the flood issues in San Diego. They want to get their house in order, how to talk about accountability for the future of their sort of issues like this, funding. And so good luck with good examples you can do here at this time. Thanks.
That concludes the public comments.
Do we have any member comments or questions? If not, I could entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved, Edson.
Moved by Edson
I'm happy to second that
and
motion.
seconded by Duncan. We can proceed to vote.
That motion passes unanimously with those members present.
Thank you. Let's move on to item number 4. We have Zachary Rivera presenting on the Specialized Transportation Grant Program, Cycle 13, Call for Projects.
Wonderful. Good morning, Chair and members of the Transportation Committee. My name is Zachary Rivera, as the Chair just mentioned, and I serve as a Program Manager of the SANDAG Specialized Transportation Grant Program, or STGP. As you may recall, I presented to you at your January 2024 meeting where I provided an overview of the Call for Projects process. I also sought your input on the criteria we should use to help determine which projects and programs should receive funding. Having taken many of your recommendations to heart, I'm returning to you today with the proposed Cycle 13 Call for Projects. Let's see. Can we advance the slide?
You know what the first slide says, you can go ahead and start.
Sure, I can do that. So there we are. Can we go to the next one, please? Let's see. Hey, there we go. But first, let me just provide a quick refresher. Many of you are aware, but let me just provide a quick refresher on the Specialized Transportation Grant Program. So comprised of the Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 program and the Transnet Senior Mini Grant Program, the SDGP seeks to improve mobility for older adults and individuals with disabilities. Eligible applicants are nonprofit organizations and local governmental agencies. For the Section 5310 program, the target population is older adults and individuals with disabilities, and older adults are defined as age 65 and over. Additionally, Section 5310 grants must be in the large urbanized area of San Diego County, and eligible grants are capital, mobility management, and operating. And the definitions of those are in your staff report. For the Senior Mini Grant Program, the target population is older adults, age 60 and over, and only mobility management and operating grants within San Diego County are eligible. So on February 17th, 2023, staff presented this committee with the Cycle 12 funding recommendations. For those of you who were on this committee at that time, you may recall that the Transportation Committee voted to recommend that the SANDAG Board approve these funding recommendations and directed staff to review the scoring process for future cycles. A week later, the board approved the funding recommendations, directed this committee to review the grant funding award process for future cycles, and assess if there were additional funding opportunities for Ride Fact, a program operated by FACT. For context, FACT, a nonprofit specialized transportation provider, last cycle had requested 400,000 in Section 5310 funds and 400,000 in senior mini grant funds for RideFact, but those grants were not awarded through the competitive process. In July of 2023, staff presented this committee with proposed improvements to the evaluation process, which are reflected in attachment 2. And as I mentioned earlier, staff kicked off the cycle 13 call for projects with the Transportation Committee in January of 2024. At that meeting, the Transportation Committee discussed 2 items pertaining to specialized transportation. That was in February. One was a regional specialized transportation panel discussion. Another concerned funding options available to FACT for specialized transportation services. During this meeting, this committee recommended that the board approve a 26% direct allocation of available Section 5310 Cycle 13 funds to FACT for RideFact, which is estimated to be about $1.69 million. I'd also like to make the Transportation Committee aware that due to Section 5310 grant forfeitures, staff was able to fully fund the Section 5310 portion of FACT's Cycle 12 RideFact request. Staff expects RideFact to resume on June 15th per FACT and continue through June of 2025. So about every 2 years, SANDAG holds a call for projects to distribute available SDGP funding. For this 13th cycle, we estimate that about $9.3 million will be available. The draft cycle 13 call for projects, including the proposed selection criteria, were informed by benchmarking research on how other regions administer similar programs, a review of the fiscal year 2024 Transnet Triennial Performance Audit, staff experience and expertise, as well as stakeholder feedback, including from this committee. A key component of the Cycle 13 development process was indeed stakeholder engagement. Since I presented to you at your January 2024 meeting, staff hosted a stakeholder workshop in February to focus on the evaluation criteria and gather input. Starting in late February and continuing through the end of March, staff engaged various working groups and stakeholder groups, which are listed in attachment 1 of your staff report. This engagement was primarily focused on the evaluation criteria. Finally, throughout the development process, staff also received input via social media, email, and a comment form available on the SDGP webpage. Through these efforts, we received well over 100 comments from more than 100 participants. Service quality, reliability, and affordability for passengers emerged as dominant themes. During the stakeholder workshop, we presented the Cycle 12 criteria. We asked participants to indicate how important each criteria was to them on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 representing least importance and 5 representing most importance. As shown on this slide, participants rated operational/implementation plan and need and equity as the most important criteria. So this slide shows the proposed changes to the evaluation criteria categories we used last cycle. As mentioned earlier, the proposed criteria were informed in part from your feedback. For example, we proposed to increase possible points for the need and equity criteria category from 15 to 20. Additionally, we proposed to reinstate past performance adjustments as an evaluation criterion to not only provide greater transparency to the Transportation Committee and potential applicants, but also discourage poor performance and reward strong performance of existing SDGP grantees. Staff would assign past performance scores in an objective fashion based on a standardized monitoring checklist, and existing grantees would have an opportunity to review their past performance scores during the evaluation process. To be clear, the past performance adjustment criterion would not apply to new applicants. The proposed changes in their totality are discussed in attachment 1 and detailed in attachment 2, starting on page 97 of your agenda packet. For context, the SANDAG board last February awarded about $5.3 million in Section 5310 funding to 11 grants. For the senior mini grant program, the SANDAG board awarded about $2.8 million to 4 grants of the 11 that were submitted. Of the 4 that were awarded, 2 applicants received about 72% of available senior mini grant funding. The maps on this slide show the service areas of the board awarded grants by funding source. The darker green shading represents overlapping services, which shows a concentration of service in central San Diego. The 2 of the senior mini grants were countywide. And if you can't see the slides too clearly, the one on the right is senior mini grant, and the one on the left is the section for the Section 5310 program. Since 2010, the SDGP has set minimum and maximum grant award thresholds to ensure that SANDAG administrative costs for the program are reasonable and that limited funds were distributed to a variety of services. Currently, the maximum amount of senior mini grant funding an applicant can receive each cycle is $1.2 million. However, based on the results of the Cycle 12 call and stakeholder feedback to encourage a broader distribution of funding, we propose to reduce the amount of senior mini grant funding an applicant can receive to $1 million. We don't propose any changes to the Section 5310 minimum or maximum grant thresholds. So the current and proposed maximum 5310 funding an applicant can receive is $1.2 million. This committee, however, recommended that FACT receive a direct allocation of Section 5310 funds, which is anticipated to be about $1.69 million, as I mentioned earlier, and FACT be allowed to compete for additional Section 5310 funds. Should the board approve the TC's recommendation, the TC could further recommend that this allocation be exempted from the maximum grant award calculation. Staff believes this option best aligns with the intent of the TC's recommendation from February of 2024. If the board approves the allocation and this option were chosen, FACT could receive up to about $2.8 million in Section 5310 funds, or about 44% of available Section 5310 funding. Another option would be to raise the Section 5310 maximum threshold to $1.8 million or higher. Staff does not recommend this option, however, because it could decrease the likelihood that there would be a broad distribution of funding throughout the region. And if the board does not approve a direct allocation, FACT, like other applicants, could compete for up to $1.2 million in Section 5310 funding. Also, in response to stakeholder feedback, we propose to allow indirect costs for the senior mini grant program, starting with the Cycle 13 call for projects. Staff presented proposed indirect cost guidelines to the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee, or ITOC, at its April 10th, 2024 meeting. Based on feedback provided during that meeting and subsequent discussions with an ITOC subcommittee, we suggest 2 options that senior mini grant grantees could choose from. 1, a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, or 2, the de minimis rate allowed by 2 CFR 200, the federal grants guidance. These options align with the federal guidelines, which would streamline SANDAG administrative efforts and allow senior mini grantees, many of whom are nonprofit organizations, to recoup a portion of their indirect costs. We also propose several improvements to the call for projects process, as discussed in Attachment 1 and shown in Attachment 2. While I won't discuss all the proposed improvements On this slide, I'll note that we included an enhanced scoring rubric to mitigate evaluator bias. We also plan to develop funding recommendations based on total application score, which is more common and understandable rather than the sum of ranks approach used last cycle. And these are all follow-up actions from your July meeting, and we took those recommendations to heart. At your January meeting, staff received feedback to review the process for awarding partial awards. As discussed in attachment 2, we suggest that we keep the current practice, assess the results from this cycle, and based on those results, revisit for cycle 14. During several TC meetings, we also received a request for information on legal options available to the TC and the board to deviate from the funding recommendations at the end of the call for projects process. In consultation with General Counsel, staff has outlined 3 options as shown on this slide and detailed in attachment 2. Staff suggests option 1 so the Transportation Committee can serve as an additional check to ensure that the criteria were accurately applied and the evaluation process was properly carried out. Staff would provide this committee the full results of the evaluation process, including individual evaluator scores, so that the committee can review these details for potential errors or inconsistencies. So in terms of next steps, we plan to present the STGP Cycle 13 call for projects to the board in May or June of 2024, depending on the outcome of this meeting. Pending board approval, we would release the Cycle 13 call on July 1st, 2024, opening a 90-day application window. From October 2024 through January of 2025, submitted applications are reviewed for eligibility, eligible applicants are evaluated, and funding recommendations are developed. And then from there, we then plan to return to you in February or March of 2025 with funding recommendations. Pending subsequent board approval, awarded senior mini grant projects could begin July 1st, 2025, and awarded Section 5310 grants could begin October 1st, 2025. So in closing, I just want to thank you all for your feedback and engagement during the development of the call. If your agency or an agency you know is interested in applying, please let us know. We always encourage eligible agencies to apply. Additionally, I presented the proposed evaluation criteria to the ITALK last Wednesday, and that committee did not propose any refinements to the criteria. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Let me start out by saying thank you for working on this process, taking the comments from this committee and others, and working with the community to develop priorities and working on these proposed revisions. We're going to go on to public comment and then come back for the committee to work on this issue. Thank you. So Francesca, do we have any public comments on item 4?
Thank you, Chair. We do have quite a few public comments on this item. I'll start with the folks who are here in the room with Lisa Noakes, and Lisa will be followed by Adriana.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Noakes, Executive Director of the Peninsula Shepherd Center. While maps might show organizations covering all parts of San Diego, the reality is that coverage is not robust in all areas. Coalition organizations provide critical services in our transportation areas with daily van service and wheelchair accessibility. Duplicity of services is necessary to ensure that our seniors receive full coverage. Funding to support only large agencies and awarding carve-outs outside the competitive application process will leave seniors in many areas of the county without the services that they need. Social interaction is a key and proven component of successful aging. We have clients, not riders. The social wraparound services we provide are invaluable and an important part of our transportation programs. Providing rides is just transactional, but rides with social interaction is transformative. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Adriana Yamhatpe, followed by Deborah Martin.
Good morning. I'm Adriana Yamhatpe from Traveler's Aid. You first met Earl when he spoke at the February TC meeting where he shared the personal impact that Traveler's Aid made on his life. I'd like to share how 5310 and SMG funds helped with his journey. In 2022, Earl was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He was living in Chula Vista and considered extremely low income. A social worker connected Earl to our agency so we could assist in providing him with 66 trips to and from his radiation and chemotherapy appointments. Since being deemed cancer-free, Earl has continued to battle a number of other health issues, and we have provided an additional 70 rides to and from medical appointments. Recently, we connected him with an orientation and mobility specialist to assist in navigating public transit as he is determined to travel independently. He now takes a bus and trolley everywhere with a bus pass provided by our Senior Ride program. You may see Earl on the news next week as he shows off his newly built cottage for low-income older adults. These funds are not just transportation, they are the lifeline that many individuals need to get to and from as they experience health challenges, finances, and mobility issues. Please keep Earl and the thousands of clients served through our coalition in mind as you vote this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Deborah Martin, followed by Christine Stensberg. Our member of the public wanted to show some media with their comments, so they're pulling that up right now, and we'll start the timer when they're ready.
All right. Good morning. I'm Deb Martin. I'm the CEO of ElderHelp and a member of the Coalition of Specialized Transportation Providers. We're comprised of 5 local nonprofits with over combined 255 years of providing transportation services to the entire San Diego County. Because it has far-reaching implications for all of our programs and future cycles, we respectfully request that the issues of the carve-out and cap exemption for 5310 be separated from the Cycle 13 criteria discussion and/or vote. We aim for an equitable, competitive process that holds us all accountable. We are a no-cost provider of rides to our clients. We have a client, Sally, who's 80 years old, renter, fixed income, had a stroke in January. She needs physical therapy 3 times a week. She can't afford to pay cost of her rides, even $5 a ride. We don't just provide a ride, we provide a lifeline of social services to help keep our clients safely in their homes and their communities as long as possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Christine Stensberg, followed by Kaylee Levitt.
The coalition members work hard to use resources as wisely as possible. Our cost per ride ranges from $2.14 to $15.10. FACT's proposed cost of ride is double that at $30 and lately has been as high as $80. At the February 16th Transportation Committee meeting, FACT was provided the direct carve-out as mentioned. If that money was going to coalition members, could we actually get the slides back up? I didn't know they were.
If you could share your screen again on your computer, thank you.
Sorry. Are you able to see that?
Sorry, could you try that one more time? Okay, there we go. Thank you.
If the money was competitively bid, the coalition members could provide as high as 111,000 rides, while FACT would only be able to provide 56,000 rides. This is a loss to San Diego County by over 55,000 rides. That's vulnerable people that needed to get to medical appointments that would be unable to because the money would be running out. Today, we're here to talk to you about how important these rides are and transformative with our wraparound services. And we're going to continue to show slides for the next few speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Kaylee Levitt, followed by Marcy Roque.
Thank you. Kaylee Levitt with Jewish Family Service. You're here to discuss today if FACT is allowed to compete for additional rides. If you vote today to allow FACT to compete, they'll be able to get 44% more of funds, of all funds available. Using the same cost per rides calculation, this would mean 95,000 rides would be lost in San Diego County. 95,000 rides. Now, we need more rides in San Diego County, not less. Specialized transportation agencies already have wait lists, and we already are capping rides where we are right now. A loss of 95,000 rides is not just rides, it's allowing these individuals to, less rides means more social isolation, and also means more poor health outcomes for these vulnerable populations and these older adults. It is essential that this committee considers all these factors and make sure to serve the community by allowing to use these funds in a more essential way for more quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Marcy Roque, who will be followed by Marilyn Greenblatt.
Good morning. I'm Marcy Roque from Travelers Aid. As you can see, the $1.6 million carve-out approved as part of option 3 in your February meeting provides FACT with 26% of all available 5310 funding in cycle 13. They will be in a position to receive 44% of all 5310 funding if they are allowed to compete for what's left and are successful. To maintain a fair and equitable process, we ask the following. Reverse the carve-out of $1.6 million proposed for FACT from the February 16th meeting. Keep the program competitive and the process equitable by allowing all applicants to compete for the funding. If the carve-out remains in place, we request the following considerations to ensure an equitable and competitive process for all. Reduce FACT's carve-out to $1.2 million. Keep the maximum cap per applicant the same for all at $1.2. FACT should not be able to compete for the remaining Section 5310 funds after already receiving a carve-out. The carve-out reduces the funds available for other applicants. Allowing FACT to compete eliminates a fair and competitive process. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Marilyn Greenblatt, followed by Phil Monroe.
Hi, I'm with Jewish Family Service. I want to share a story of one of the clients we transport and the life impact of On the Go. Camille is 78 years old and low income. Camille has partial vision and many health challenges. She has a life-threatening blood disorder that requires twice-a-week treatments, 3 to 4 hours long, which she compares to dialysis but filters the blood. Camille also has weekly oncology appointments, eye appointments, and other doctor appointments. Camille has one daughter who works and cannot drive her to all necessary appointments. Camille has no one else to depend on and no money to pay for transportation. Without on-the-go transportation, Camille wouldn't be able to get the life-saving blood treatments she needs to survive. We showed how the carve-out would be 56,000 fewer rides because of FACT's high cost per ride compared to coalition members. These fewer rides mean that Camille would not have transportation to these critical services. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Phil Monroe, followed by Christopher Anguiano.
Good morning. FACT data shows that for the last 6 months of 2023, the average cost per ride one way was over $80. The highest month was $118 a ride. FACT's executive director's salary is $245,000. Compare that to Travelers Aid with 4 full-time employees whose total salary is $220,000. FACT is an expensive organization. Travelers Aid provides more rides each month, has significantly lower cost per ride, and has more active clients than FACT. Recently, FACT has twice been on the SANDAG watch list for late and inaccurate reports. Why should you vote special funding for an organization with such a poor performance record?
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Christopher Anguiano, followed by Dan Toda.
Hello, everybody. My name is Christopher Anguiano, talking here for a fact. They're a great company. I've heard some of the things that were said, but they're dependable, they're reliable, they're affordable too. And I have balance problems, I'm blind and can't see, and they do door-to-door services. They go places other companies can't go. And I'm not on the vehicle for over 2 hours. And they get me to where I need to go, point A to point B. The drivers are all friendly, courteous, and respectful. They get out of their vehicles to help me to their vehicle. They help me get my seatbelt on. And I feel like without fact, there is no good transportation out there. So I hope you give them the funding. It will help people like me and everybody else out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Dan Toda, followed by Mark Fletcher.
Good morning, Commission. I'm here to speak on behalf of fact. They're the only company that covers the whole county. Once again, the whole county from Fallbrook to San Ysidro, from Alpine to the beaches of La Jolla and Pacific Beach. All these other companies, fine, great, but they don't cover the whole county. And that's an essential part of the services that we need being disabled of any sort. They cover the whole county. Please remember that. Jewish Family Services, Travelers Aid, they have niches and regions. So we need a fact, fun fact, for this reason, they do cover the whole county. There's people that travel from Fallbrook, people that travel from Ramona, and we need to continue to fund fact for this reason. There is no agency that does the whole county. And in future, when we're receiving funding, please remember, you need to have a qualification of how much of the population are you going to serve? What geographic areas are you going to serve? And these
Thank
funding.
you. Your time has expired. Our next speaker will be Mark Fletcher, followed by Arun Prem.
Okay. Speakers in front of you. Thank you. My name is Mark Fletcher. I live in the town of Fallbrook. I'm here to represent all the people that utilize paratransit, but live outside the service areas of MTS and NCTD Lyft. For many of us, Ride Fact is the only lifeline to the outside world. Not only does Ride Fact allow us to do the things we need, like shopping and doctor's appointments, they allow us to thrive by doing things like volunteering in the community and attending classes. I challenge you to put yourself in our shoes and to sit in our wheelchairs and to remember what it was like to be stuck at home during the pandemic. And I implore you not to doom us to that ignominious fate by not funding Ride Fact. So many of us count on Ride Fact, and we're all counting on you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration, and have a wonderful weekend.
I think our next speaker will be Arun Prem. And I also have a speaker slip for someone named Tony Kranz. I'm not sure if that person is in the room or if they were putting in a speaker slip on behalf of the vice chair. But if so, if you could step up to the podium after.
I did
Arun.
not fill out the form, but it was
Tony, here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So there is another Tony Kranz. Good. Morning, committee. Thank you for your ongoing advocacy for additional funding for specialized transportation going on over the last 2 years. During this time, FACT implemented on-demand accessible countywide ride FACT transportation with your support and support from SANDAG. We implemented a pilot on-demand accessible service in North County in partnership with NCTD for Lyft clients. Last summer, FACT collaborated with MTS to serve MTS clients who were left without options during the contractors' strike action. As CTSA, designated by SANDAG, our role is to not only fill the critical gaps in services, but also promote the most effective use of available funds, reduce duplication of services, and enhance collaboration amongst all the service providers. To that end, I urge you to support SANDAG's staff recommendation regarding FACT's funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Tony Kranz, and then we will go to Blair Beekman on Zoom.
Okay, the name is Tony San Nicholas. And good morning, Transportation Committee. I'm Tony with Renewing Life Transportation. My story is personal. We started, our transportation was put in our heart about over 10 years ago. About 10 years ago, we found FACT. We were using our our own cars and to try to do this transportation, and it was going well. But because of FACT and the vehicles that they have, they were able to change our vehicle fleet into newer, better ADA qualified vehicles. FACT can continue to do this with other places, other companies. And when they can do that, that's the best way to expand and to cover more ground. I have so much more to say because I think Arun is a great and a
Thank you
good
so much. Your
president.
time has expired. Our next speaker will be Blair Beekman, and Blair will be our final speaker on this item.
Hi, Blair Beekman. Thanks a lot for this item. As we're trying to gather ourselves together to deal with the future of ride sharing, I think there's been really good efforts from all sides of the issue around SANDAG to work on this issue and to kind of bring it together and come back to the basics. Now that we're coming back to the basics of ride sharing, it sounds like we have to be starting to better address, and make sure that ride sharing is functioning well and doing its good job. And it's from that place that we can hopefully return to creative ideas that how ride sharing can be an important part in the future of public transportation. And so good luck in the efforts on this issue to really improve upon it and make it work and bring back its good practices and then create new good examples for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the public commenters. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, we do have one additional. Jean Durgan, you can go ahead, and Jean will be our final speaker. Jean, you are self-muted at the moment.
I'm a senior. Good morning. I'm Jean Durgan and a member of the Peninsula Shepherd Senior Center's Board of Directors. I want to add my voice in support of the coalition. Our goal is to provide much needed rides at the best possible cost as simply as possible. I strongly encourage you to reverse the carve out for FACT to allow the funding of coalition transportation programs and provide full coverage of areas not widely served by the larger agencies. Robust coverage of all San Diego service areas is critical, and the social interaction has invaluable benefits to the health and well-being of San Diego seniors. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. That concludes the public commenters.
Thank you. I want to thank all the public commenters that came out. It's difficult to travel, I know, and I thank you for coming here this morning. Before we get into a discussion with the committee, I want to clarify an item that many of us may not know. and it's the term Consolidated Transportation Service Agency. If I can get that answered by either Zach or Jenny. And then after that, I want to give some instructions on how we want to proceed with this item so that we can get through it effectively and efficiently.
Sure. So FACT is the current Consolidated Transportation Service Agency, or CTSA. They were designated as such through a competitive process in 2006. There has not been a competition for that designation since. The CTSA, the role of the CTSA is trying to consolidate specialized transportation services in a given region. It is a state mandate for different metropolitan planning organizations. In fact, is the current CTSA. Does that help to?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure we got that clarified and defined as we talk about the CTSA. We have.
May I add to that? Just
Yes.
so everyone's really clear on the CTSA. So that is a requirement that there is a CTSA. Factory receives a specific amount of funding on an annual basis to perform that function. And that is to coordinate rides. It does not require that rides be provided. It's that coordination role. So I just wanted to make that very clear. We have a requirement in the contract with FACT to provide an annual report on the work that's done in their role as a CTSA. And so that's a report that comes to the Transportation Committee on an annual basis. I don't know off the top of my head what the set aside is for the CTSA. Do you happen to know?
It's about 190,000 a year.
190,000, and that comes out of our TDA
TDA
funds, which are the Transportation Development Act funds that come to the region. So I just want to make that distinction very clear here to the Transportation Committee. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So we're our committee, we have actually 4 different things to work on, or items that's been recommended by staff on this item. So what I'd like to do is for us to, before we entertain a motion at the very beginning, just have some discussion, and if we can maybe keep the discussion on the call for projects, and which includes changing the evaluation process. That's the number 1 on the description of this item. And then after we maybe entertain a motion on that item, go into the other discussion about the carve out and distribution of funding. Included with that could be number 4, which is allowing indirect costs. I think if we deal with it that way, we may be able to get some of the more easy items done first with the discussion and motion, and then get to the more difficult parts of item 4. Any objections to that? That's great. So anyone wants to start out the discussion on this item? Any hands risen? And primarily, if we could talk about the changing evaluation criteria and indirect costs. That's the type 1 and 4 on the task for this item. Or recommendations. Any discussion? Ms. Duncan.
Chair, just to kind of ask a clarifying question, it might be helpful if there is a motion on the table for the discussion to focus on, and if that is to accept staff's recommendation, amendments could be made in an orderly fashion to that. I just want to make sure that this discussion it relates to, well,
I understand. But Councilman Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, to staff and council, I appreciate your work on this issue. In regard to option 1, I am fine with the criteria changes. I believe they're appropriate, and they were designed to address some of the discussions that were had regarding back in cycle 12. And I don't want to go through each of those, but if any other member wants to, I am happy to participate at that time. But the reason I wanted to discuss this for a moment is that in regard to option one, we also had the memo prepared on this item. And in that memo, there were options given addressing some of the discussions we had back when we had cycle 12, where there was some back and forth and discussion with our general counsel, I think at the board level, and myself about what type of discretion is legal or allowed for either the transportation committee after the awards, the evaluation process is done, I should say, and what discretion either the transportation committee has on recommendations separate from that, and whether the board has discretion to adjust the recommendations after the evaluation period in case there's something, and hopefully not with these new changes, but if something comes out that just doesn't effectuate what the board believes should happen in regard to the transportation funding. So I had a slight change of language, and if you said hold motions, correct? Or should I mention this language and then we could wait, or do you want me to do it as a motion?
Let's go to Member Sanchez, which had a comment, and then I'll come back to you if you're ready for a motion.
Would you like to hear the proposed comments so that if the other board
Go ahead.
members would like to discuss it when it goes to
Go
them?
right ahead.
So what I would just add to option one, so I'm not proposing changing option one as set forth other than adding the following to the end of it, which would say, and I think this is simpler language than what was proposed at the end of on page 7 of the discussion memo, just to state, except that the board shall retain discretion over final 5310 awards subject to FTA requirements. And I believe it's appropriate to say that council has discussed that FTA requirement language and that it would be acceptable to the FTA.
Can you put that up on the screen so that we could see that?
And I just sent it to them. They're going to work on putting that up. It might be helpful though, if that is the motion and then there's a second. If we're going to amend the slide, I just want to make sure it's been properly put before the body.
I'll second that.
So that's just for the issue of option one. Does that include
the option one that you asked that we discussed first? I'm sorry.
Just one, I think this is a point of order. These aren't necessarily options. These are all recommended actions. So the first action is to accept the criteria. And I think your proposal is to amend that action to include this additional language. So just so we're.
Yes.
Okay, so we're clear. That's
So
one
action item one.
Yes.
I made a motion to approve it as stated with the additional language saying, except that the board shall retain discretion over final 5310 awards subject to FTA requirements.
Great. Thank you. That's the part I wanted is 4.1, and then that deals with all the criteria changes in the selection process. So that was moved by Duncan and seconded by Mayor White. So we have any additional discussion on that?
I have a question to the maker of the motion, and I hate to do this, but what is the point of adding? Isn't that already implied that the board has discretion over anything that comes before the body?
I appreciate the question, and I believed that to be true back when the board discussed it, as you just stated, and there was discussion from our council that that was not acceptable and that the board doesn't retain discretion. And he made an analogy specifically to contract bidding type of requirement and then subsequently changing it. And we had some discussion, and this is sort of the evolution out of that, is to make this clear that in regard to the 5310, it is acceptable to retain that discretion. I understand, what you're saying, and that was my original position. And then there was a lot of confusion over that, and the board was told, I think specifically, that it probably wasn't appropriate to retain discretion over it after the evaluation. And I had a long discussion about how in other grants, including in Coronado, and I gave specific examples about how there was defects in our grant process one time where one scorer put extremely inappropriate low scores, even though the other scores were high, and it caused that grant to miss by 1 point. That's kind of what they have the options at the end of page 7. But I understand your question. It's just a clarification. I'm not into redundancy, but that is why the council checked with the FTA.
And I'm happy to speak to that, and Councilmember Moreno. So what the Transportation Committee is doing today is approving the criteria that an evaluation committee will use when it evaluates different proposals. So when they process those evaluations, the question was whether or not Transportation Committee and essentially the board could deviate from those recommendations. And the options that we've laid out there, certainly you can deviate under Senior Many or 5310 if there was some error or inconsistency. And we can make that more robust so that TC could actually see the proposals and see, was there an error and inconsistency? That's one option. There's also the option that TC could become the evaluation body, essentially applying the criteria and take the place of the evaluation committee. And then for 5310, you could do away with competition completely. I think the issue that Councilmember Duncan raised previously is, does the board have the ability to deviate beyond something that is an error or inconsistency in how the evaluation committee reviews the proposals? So if there was a disagreement, I would have come down differently. So that issue for 5310, we received feedback from FTA yesterday that the board could deviate from the evaluation criteria. But for Senior Many, the position is that that deviation would not be allowed. We're essentially setting up the rules of the game in this action, or what the board will approve, or the board will set up the rules of the game. So we don't want to change those rules later. Does that make sense or answer your question?
It absolutely makes sense. And if I may speak to the motion on the floor, I think that discretion or that this action should be left up to the board, not to the TC. If the board wants to have discretion over final section 5310 awards, I think that the body needs to decide that, not a committee. So I'm going to be voting no on the motion.
Well, and I think the motion is a recommendation to the board that they retain discretion, that the board shall retain discretion. So the TC could make a recommendation that the board deviate, but I just want to make clear, I think the motion does relate to board discretion.
Sure, Councilman Duncan, do you want to clarify a point?
So my understanding of what we were doing today is sending this to, making a recommendation to the board. And then the board would also approve this. Is that incorrect?
So that's true. So the Transportation Committee recommends that the Board of Directors, we are sending the criteria. And this first action relates to what are those criteria going to be? They're included in the call for projects. We also want to add on to that, at least this motion is proposing that we add on to that certain discretion for the board to deviate. So it's a recommendation to the board to accept that to accept that as a part of the process.
Right. So it's two parts. The board would get this. This is how it gets to the board.
Yes.
And then the board would decide if they want to retain that discretion. That's exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. And the other comment that I missed saying when in answer to Councilmember Moreno's question about why now or why this language is that this, if done, would, even if we already have it, would clarify to applicants that this was reserved before they apply, which is, the more discretion, which was a little bit of the concern of Council Kirk at the board meeting in cycle 12. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I don't know, Councilmember Moreno, if that answers your question. This action that we're taking right now actually goes before the board anyway.
I understand that. It just seems strange to me and redundant, but maybe it's not outlined as clearly. And so right now, the TC makes the final decision?
No, the board.
No, I know, but so then why are we, if the board is already does that, it seems redundant to me. And my other question is, what do other agencies do? Do they leave the discretion to the board or in this case?
Sure, I can answer that one. So I did a peer review of about 8 other regions that have similar programs. A lot of them have an awarding body. I asked if any of them had deviated from the funding recommendations provided by evaluation committees. While some of them had the authority, none of them deviated, other than for errors or inconsistencies.
Got it. It just, like I said, it seems a little redundant to me, but we'll keep on discussing.
Councilman Duncan.
Again, just a final comment. At the board meeting on cycle 12, council told us specifically to the board that we did not have that discretion. And so the board did not exercise it. That is what happened. This is the fix. I can't really say it any clearer.
And just to, I think it's what the general counsel, Mr. Kirk, said was that that the board cannot replace the recommendations that are made. So if there's an error and inconsistency, there's a basis. But for the board just to decide to deviate based on something than what the evaluation committees proposed was not allowed under the evaluation criteria that the board adopted, which TC recommended.
And maybe just to really put a fine point on this, if the board were to look at sort of the ranking of all of the recommended funding allocations and determine that maybe there was a need to make some adjustments for, say, greater distribution throughout the region. So let's say that the highest, the group that got the most awards was only focused in one particular area, since that may not be part of the criteria that the evaluation committee is using, but the evaluation committee, followed the criteria, but the board might say, gosh, this doesn't include these parts of the county. And therefore I'd like to go down the list to this entity that does provide that service and actually move them up on the list. So it affords the board that discretion at the end of the day that is not necessarily related specifically to the points and the criteria that the committee uses. And so that was really the read from the general counsels, that the evaluation committee followed the criteria, provided points accordingly. There were no mistakes there. And right now, the only discretion the board has is to make changes if they find mistakes. This allows that discretion if you want to move that line in some fashion, or even determine we don't think this entity should get the money for X, Y, and Z reasons, allowing the board to make that decision when it comes forward. So just to give you that was the sense of the discussion in my recollection.
So what's the point of the process and of us seeing this in TC? If we put this in, and right now everybody's all good, but let's say we have a tyrant for a chair and they could just arbitrarily take all the hard work that Mr. Rivera's done, all the hard work that we've done here at TC and decide, nope, it's my pet project, got whipped the votes, I get it. What's the point of having a process? That's my question.
That's a good question. Long ago, when I used to be in the audience, the SANDAG boards dealt with this issue quite often with various grant programs. I think SANDAG has worked for a long time to now develop a objective evaluation process with those who look at these grant applications in depth. We voted on a criteria system, which I think is appropriate, but hopefully in the final say it does go to the community with these evaluators that know these topics well and do a deep dive into each grant application and provide some objective scoring process. The two grant programs, one of them does not allow the board to make those changes, if I'm correct, Betsy, and the other one gives the board some discretion. But even when that's done, it should be pointing towards an objective process, so that precisely what you said, letting the board have that kind of discretion. We shouldn't allow that. And I think we're working hard to depoliticize the process itself, and that we have people who know specialized transportation well and can evaluate these grant applications well.
So essentially what we're telling agencies here is get to know the board chair, get to know the board, lobby them, take them out to lunch, put them on your boards, you'll get the money. That's basically what we're saying with this action.
Well, I don't think it opens the door any further than it has been. It simply states what the current rules are and have been for a long time. And I think Councilman Duncan's motion is to clarify that, because the description of option 1 in the discussion memo we had didn't state that clearly. So, and since we were given different instructions at the last board meeting, just wanted to clarify that item. Any other discussions on this motion?
Yeah, sorry, the chair. Yeah, I, for many of the same reasons, share some of the concerns Councilmember Moreno has been expressing, which is the problem with allowing the board to have discretion, as opposed to the discretion the board has right now, I believe, is to say, this clearly didn't work out right and send it back, which of course creates problems from a scheduling perspective. But my strong suggestion would be, if we were to move this forward and suggest that the board should have some discretion, that we up the threshold so that it either has to be a super majority vote, 70% of the vote, or a unanimous vote by the board to actually change the action of the outcome. And then you at least mitigate the fact that, you can have some, people going out and closing up to board members and thus potentially creating a political outcome as opposed to an objective outcome.
Thank you. And Nurse Sanchez.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I've never been taken out to lunch. I'd like to speak in support of option 1, per the maker of the motion. As representatives here for the entire region, there are times and there are certain situations, and especially geographically, where need and equity, which is one of the criterias, and I do support the criteria. It's part of 1 for determining those that are successful in terms of providing these very, very critical needs in transportation, in that we are basically facing probably more than in any recent time, families that are really hard hit, families, seniors with disabilities. And because of that, the criteria for need and equity need to really be focused on. And I am happy that there's a proposal to give it a little more weight from 15 to 20. Our communities are having to move because they can't, because the vacancy rate is so low. They're moving out east where there is so little transportation options. And we're, on the one hand, losing workforce housing. On the other hand, we are making it even harder and harder for our seniors and handicapped to be able to live. I understand the need for duplicity to be able to get to those doctor's appointments, but I'm dealing with communities, and I know that some others of you are dealing with communities that can't even make the 1 appointment per year. And so for me, these are harder decisions that we make because there are people behind them, and I know that you're seeing them. I certainly am. So I understand when the sense of the pie getting smaller. But we have to remember that we are dealing with a community, and how we raise that or make the pie bigger is maybe really the biggest issue that we have to be here making. Fairness does depend on geographical realities, and I wish that we could have more duplicity to make it easier for people to get around, but we're talking about absolute, just basest of needs. So I do ask us to consider that and consider supporting option 1. Thank you.
Seeing no other, Supervisor.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just want to speak to the motion on the floor briefly. I wanted a couple of things to clarify that I've heard in this conversation. One is, Ms. Blake, the legal opinion that potentially broadens the discretion of the board came from FTA legal counsel. Where do we get that from?
We spoke to FDA regional staff. And
Is there anything in writing, or it was a comment?
Yes.
Okay. And I personally would like to see that before supporting this. And the reason is because, Mr. Rivera, I heard you say that currently no other agency provides that more broad discretion, or was it the opposite of that?
Yeah, let me clarify so that a lot of the agencies have the authority to have discretion, but in terms of exercising that authority, none of them had.
None of them have exercised the authority. And it is clear in their regulations and otherwise board policies, whatever they operate off of, it's clear that that discretion is broad beyond the errors and omissions that we've heard.
Some of them, it was just errors and inconsistencies. Some of it was broader.
Okay. In their language, not just interpretation, but strictly.
Yeah, in their language.
Okay. I kind of like the threshold idea of having a higher threshold for this. It could be, there is potential for even the appearance of impropriety, which right now as an agency we are dealing with. And so that's just something that I'm thinking about too. And I also just, the bottom line is any committee or board has the authority to vote something down. And the question will be, if this is a better option to go back and forth in a board meeting about certain awardees, than it is to vote something down and take it back to staff with further evaluation criteria. That's the question here. And if timing is a concern, then maybe our timing the timeline should change, as opposed to putting this on a board with, different board members bringing different situations to the board in their authority and their capacity. So those are just my concerns. I understand the intent. I just think it can go awry, and I'm concerned about what that would do to SANDAG overall. Thank you.
Ms. Cooney.
Yeah, I just wanted to, as a transportation provider for many of the people most in need of transportation in the county, I just wanted to voice something that is very evident from the speakers that spoke already, and that is it's such a complex fabric of different providers that we have in the county. And every one of them is important, but not every one of them can be paid for. So having an established criteria that is established based on a full understanding of that fabric of transportation providers is probably much more important in this space, because we are dealing with the neediest of residents in our county. And so I would think that we don't want to put in a recommendation that we support discretion on the fly in a decision-making body when there is such complexity to this. I mean, I could go on, and Councilmember Moreno could probably as well, but all these providers are living it day to day, and I think it's important to respect that.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Any other commenters? If, last word, Ms. Duncan.
Sure. I just want to make a couple brief comments in regard to some of the things that were mentioned. I would be a huge supporter of having a threshold in regard to this. The issue that has been discussed numerous times at SANDAGs when SANDAG board meetings, when that type of suggestion has come up, is that that would violate state law based off of the weighted vote, which we've been told repeatedly by council is non-waivable, and that the board can't, and that they could do it in practice, but that it would be illegal for the board to say there has to be a certain threshold and that the weighted vote couldn't overrule that. So, you know, as we all well know, the weighted vote currently exists. So there already is the fear of the giant tyrants who hold all those weighted votes, you know, the city of San Diego, doing whatever they want and being wined and dined and lobbied, and all the smaller cities such as yourself and myself and the most of us here, right? Because it is most of us, because otherwise they wouldn't need the weighted vote to overrule us. That already exists in our $1.6 billion budget this year, where at any time, those weighted vote holders could do anything they want and take all the money just for their geography. My suggested language was actually intended to have a discussion, the opposite of that. Therefore, if there was something that looked like it didn't come out, that was leaving part of one of the remoter or smaller cities, you know, potentially in trouble with coverage, that then we could have a board discussion about it and vote. I mean, obviously right now, when this goes to the SANDAG board, anyone who has any idea of how it slightly even operates knows that as soon as this goes to the board, there could be immediately a weighted vote called. It could be sent back to totally change the criteria and make it actually not even send it back. They could just change the criteria to say all the money just goes to the city of San Diego, and we're only going to have grants for the city of San Diego is eligible to receive them. And we're calling for the weighted vote, and that's approved. Go put the grant applications out. This isn't some new concept of whining and dining, lobbying board members. I mean, we have votes. You know, every single thing we do with a $1.6 billion budget is exactly the same. We vote on our regional plan. We vote on amendments to it. And this is the world we live in. I'd love to change it and get rid of the weighted vote. If we have a way that's legal, the council can tell us on any item, I'll vote and support it. Thank you.
So we have a
Just to address that, Jack, if I can, just from the perspective, I mean, the thing about AB 805 is that if you have a requirement of a higher threshold, then the weighted vote also has to follow that higher threshold. So if you have a 70% or 75% vote requirement, then you also have to get 75% of the weighted vote. So it still also does create a higher threshold and provide a meaningful barrier there. The downside of my recommendation is that we can only do this as policy, and you can change any policy with just a majority vote. So if somebody doesn't really like having a higher threshold, they could first recommend that we change that policy, vote with a majority vote to change it, and then you no longer have that policy anymore. But that clearly, at least politically, is a much more difficult thing to do in the real time. So I'll still stand by my statement that if we're going to go down this path, I mean, I also appreciate the comments made by the transit agencies. If we're going to go down this path, that it should be a much higher threshold than just a 50% vote for the board to do reallocations things.
Motion on the floor, and the motion is to move on what staff recommended on 4.1 with additional going with option 1 in the staff discussion memo with some added language with regards to board having discretion. Chair or Vice Chair.
To Councilmember Zito's point, I wonder if the maker of the motion would consider a friendly amendment that ends it with awards subject to FDA requirements and a supermajority vote by the board.
I'm happy to accept the amendment. I'm not sure, again, based on how 805 is written, that it allows it in non-delineated items, but I'm happy to support it.
I appreciate that. I think that, the concern being that the city of San Diego and Chula Vista might take over and give it to all their buddies, right? And the county might be involved, right? So I think this would make it much more difficult.
Yes, sir.
But
I agree.
okay. Would the seconder accept that as well?
Yes.
Just question, what is a supermajority? Is that 2/3?
Yeah, 2/3.
Okay, supermajority, which is 2/3.
FTA requirements and supermajority vote of the board.
And just give staff a second.
Was that friendly amendment accepted by unanimous consent of the body? Because it's already with the body. I just want to make sure everyone agrees to that.
Sure.
We don't have to take a vote, but
Yeah,
if you
sure.
object.
Unanimous. Is anyone objecting to that friendly amendment? Seeing no hands going up, it's been accepted by unanimous consent. I'll give staff a little time to write in additional
No,
language.
that's good. And John was able to chime in. If we do add that to the motion, then the supermajority vote would be subject to the weighted vote. So we are allowed to do it. Just wanted the group to understand how that would work. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so we have a motion and no other hands go up. Let's go on and vote on the motion.
That motion does pass with 7 yeses and 2 nos and 1 absence.
For item 4, we have 3 other parts dealing with the lowering the maximum grant amount, and then the carve out for fact, as well as reinstating the indirect costs. So we can have a discussion on this or take a motion. If we want, we could do parts of that or 2 or 3 of those last 3 items at one time. Commissioner Koenig, yes.
Yeah, so some of the speakers put up some numbers that were very concerning. If we put a lot of these providers out of business because we carve out for one provider and then we allow them to compete for other funds, then are we putting others out of business who are able to give these rides for less money? It is true that when we had a work stoppage last spring, our contractor turned to FACT to provide some of that service. It was asked, why does MTS not now have FACT working as a contractor for us? Because our contractor can do it more cost effectively. And that's why our contractor no longer is using FACT for those rides. It's my assumption. It's a business decision because they can do more rides with other providers for less. So my question is do we believe that these other providers who are doing it for less cost per passenger will no longer be able to carry as many passengers? And will FACT be able to then absorb all of those rides in the future? So that I wanted to bring front and center to all of you, because that was borne out by the testimony that we heard. And if you don't believe that, then maybe you have one answer. But if you do believe that they can provide all those rides for those customers, then perhaps the carve out is okay. But I wanted to bring that front and center because you're all the policymakers, and it is something that really needs to be taken seriously, that question.
Thank you. Mr. Musgrove.
Zach, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot here, but on slide 4 in the presentation, when you were identifying the allocations at 1.2 million, and then you had forfeiture money that would increase we'll call it an appropriation then for fact. You identified those monies as forfeitures, which I found pretty interesting because I know what that word means in my world. Were those, and we're sitting here listening to all these different providers begging for every dollar. Who was it that didn't expend the dollars that were appropriated? Was it fact? Was it the smaller groups? Was it just an error in budgeting? I'd be curious to know who it was that had to return those monies, unless the forfeiture by the broad definition is that they were outside of the permissions of the grant.
So there were two scenarios in which this happened. So the first was an organization that was awarded by the board, but did not receive funds because they could not provide sufficient matching funds. And that was an FTA requirement. And so that they had to unfortunately pull out. The second organization, they had requested and received funding for vehicles through the Section 5310 program. They provided what we thought was a correct match at the time. Vehicle prices really drastically increased. And that, as you probably all know, is a result of COVID and what's happening with inflation and such. So they had to make up the difference because the grant award was fixed and then they could not provide that additional match. So those were the two circumstances.
So those appropriations returned back to us as the grantor to be realigned as long as they're within the confines of the FTA requirements?
Correct.
And that was from cycle 12 or?
Correct, cycle 12.
Okay, so they were able to carry those over into the 13.
So we were able to use some of that funding to fund projects, fully fund RideFact with some of those funds, and then the balance was then rolled over into cycle 13.
Okay, thank you.
John.
Yeah, thank you. First, I just want to say I appreciate all the comments that were made today by members of the public, and I totally agree with my colleague from MTS about the critical nature of the service that the STPs provide. I think I would ask the staff when you talk about making this recommendation where the data was born out of it, because I think what we were showed today, and we would probably need to verify that information, that from a funding perspective, it looks like the STPs that we currently have are far more effective at the service they're providing from a cost standpoint than we would be from an allocation of moving those rides. I think that's a concern for me as the head of my agency, is how much money would we reallocate and how many rides would the community not receive as a function of shifting those rides over to another organization. You know, that is, to me, sort of the bedrock of the recommendation. I'm not sure that that the board could vote on a recommendation without that data to back it. And so I would be curious to see that information in real time. I think part of the problem that exists now is a lot of the STPs do a great job of coming to the table, and they're very specific about their ask, either from North County or from MTS, about how much they want to pay per mile or how much they want to pay per ride. I think there are some other agencies who don't follow necessarily that funding plan, and that's problematic for us as we talk about how much funding is going to be shifted over to potential another agency.
Yeah, and partly what we were describing came up at the February 2024 meeting, where we presented kind of an overview of the specialized transportation landscape, and some of the data that we have, the grant program, is provided in that. So I would refer you to that. The other thing I would mention is that many of our specialized transportation providers are specialized. So there's a variety of services, door through door, door to door, different geographies, which impacts different cost structures. So what we try to stress at the February meeting is it's really hard to do an apples to apples comparison between some of the providers, though we do provide the data about what we have in terms of cost per trip in that agenda packet.
Yeah, and some of those numbers are lower because they're using like volunteer drivers, for example, which brings the cost down versus using a contracted service provider that's going to be, you know, a little bit more costly, obviously. So it's really hard to compare one provider against another because there's so many variables that's in there. So you really can't look at a cost per trip of one versus another without kind of digging into what all those factors are because it's specialized.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would push back a little bit and say I think there's a pretty decent delta between where some of the other STPs are versus the one that wants a reallocation of money. And that is a fairly specific concern to me. If we're talking about a difference of $1 a mile or $1 a ride versus $80 a ride, right? That's a very significant delta between where I think the current STPs have their price range, and we've had no issues filing those agreements with the STPs, and where we want to take this with the potential of losing rides for our community. I think that's very concerning for us. And I don't want to speak for anybody else in the room, but I think, that's sort of the spirit of 5310, right? So, not only is it just the ridership piece, but are we being responsible, as I think some of our current STPs are, about where that money's being spent and how they're spending it.
Sure. And I think one of the other numbers that was mentioned today was more recent. So the recent trips that were provided by FACT are in a different program. They're on-demand service, which is going to be obviously a much higher cost per trip. So to try and look at data today, you're not comparing equally either. So you have to be careful with that the Ride FACT service, which is the closest comparable to what a lot of the other providers are doing today, because it's not on demand, is going to be a different number than if you look at this $80 cost per trip, which is, I think, what was mentioned today. So even that gets it a little bit confusing.
Sanchez.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add that cost is very complicated. It's not a one-dimensional thing. And so especially in outlying areas, it's going to cost you more to get to a hospital or whatever area whatever place your ultimate destination is, because there are fewer services and fewer destinations that you need to get to. So in terms of equity, it's also a difficult thing, right? It's complicated. And so I don't want us to be just looking at costs as if it was one dimensional. It really is several things we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. The main focus when I look at these issues is providing full transportation services geographically. I think somebody mentioned that earlier. We were talking about geography. If you can show me an apples to apples comparison where somebody picked up someone in, say, Ramona in a wheelchair accessible vehicle and then drove them to Mira Mesa, and FACT costs $80 and they did it for $2, which obviously is impossible, I'd be very happy to support the $2 situation. If you are having volunteer drivers pick up individuals who need transportation, and drive them, say for instance, an elderly person, and drive them around La Jolla, it's completely different. I don't believe necessarily everybody in this room was here at our prior meeting, but we had specific discussions regarding NCTD and MTS dealing with wheelchair bound or wheelchair accessible vehicle clients that were taken to the edge of one of your jurisdictions, then had to be left out for the next jurisdiction to pick that person up. I find that as a situation, something that's not acceptable and should be solved. And that's really, I believe, to a large extent, what RideFact does. If you have transportation needs, obviously the gaps are going to be what's most expensive to fill. I am a data person. I like real data. I go to court and the judge doesn't say just say what you want to say. You have to show the information and you have to compare it, and it has to make sense and be logical. So I just find the comments of the totally different products being compared is strange. And also all those other agencies, I'm not aware of anybody proposing any of them go away or that they not be funded. In fact, isn't it true what happened in cycle 12 is that Ride Fact was not funded? Is that what happened?
In the first round.
And in any event, I would be interested in all the data that you was mentioned here today and seeing how it compares and why the delta is what it is. I'd also like to know how much NCTD and MTS costs per ride for instance, each person on one of your buses.
Maybe a point of clarification. So for the senior mini grant program last cycle, there were 11 applicants for received funding and 7 did not. For the Section 5310 program, the only project that did not receive funding originally was Ride Fact.
Great. And yet, we haven't discussed item 2 or 4. I haven't heard any discussion. I'm going to make a motion so we can move along since we have other things on the agenda. I'm going to move that we move with staff recommendations on 4.2 and 4.4, so that we approve staff recommendations on those two. That's 4.2 and 4.4.
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Kranz. Any other discussions? If not, let's go ahead and move on that. That's approving staff recommendations on 4.2 and 4.4.
That motion does pass with 8 yeses, 1 no, and 1 absence.
Let's go ahead and start the discussion for 2, which is, I'm sorry, 4.3, which has to do with the allocations of 5310 and fax amount. Any hands up? Yeah. So I'm sure there's some of you that have opinions on this. I could entertain a motion. If not, I'm going to make one. Sanchez. Is there a second? I don't hear a second. Do I hear another motion? Well, I'm going to, Councilman Duncan, you were about to say something.
And I thought you were about to say something.
You can go first.
So I'm sorry, that motion is dead?
Her motion is dead. If you want to make another motion, please go ahead.
I'll wait for after you speak.
Thank you. I'm going to move that we amend our previous recommendation to the board to have Ride Fact thus receive a carve out of as we recommended last time, which is amount to about 1.6 million, which means they would have to be exempt from the $1 million cap. But however, they would not be able to compete with other applicants for remaining funds available in the 5310 funds. So my motion is amending what we acted on last time we were here by saying that the Ride Fact would not be able to compete with the remaining grant funds available, but they would receive what we committed to last time, which is about 1.6 million estimated amount at 23%.
And Chair, just to clarify, what's before the Transportation Committee right now approves what, if the board approves what the Transportation Committee recommended in February, it exempts that direct allocation from that maximum threshold. So is your intention to keep that language in, or do you not want to exempt it? Because if we don't exempt it, I think, does it just go up to 1.2 million or 1 million that could be allocated?
So currently the proposed is what the cap would be 1.2 million. If you were, as you were suggesting, Chair Sue, that would mean that their cap would be 1.6 million, and then they would not be able to compete for additional funding.
Correct.
As what I understand.
We reduced it to 1 million at our previous action, the motion that passed before this one. So this would have to mean this, my motion would have to include an exemption for that.
So you're not going to address the exemption, but
No.
you want to prohibit them from competing. Okay, so I think I just want the committee to be aware without that exemption, it would be limited at 1.2.
He's adding the exemption.
I added the.
Oh,
I-
you did. So it's essentially 3, but you're adding in and prohibiting FACT from competing for remaining section 5310.
Right, so
Grant funding?
so
Okay.
the allocation is still, the cutout is the same as we moved the last time and giving them the exemption for that. But they would not be able to compete for any remaining grant funds. Councilman Duncan.
So there's no second, I guess, at this point, but my question would be, maybe this is something we should see in writing similar to Councilmember Moreno's request on the earlier item, so we
I'm
could
gonna
digest
second-
it.
Sorry, I'm going to second it for discussion.
Thank
My
you.
apologies.
So I would still, then I appreciate that we have a second. Can we see the draft of what we're going to potentially vote on? Thank you.
Yes, yes, that's my motion.
Question.
Councilman Edson.
Yes, I have a question. So by limiting FACT to only one pool of funding, does that limit the use of those funds at all? Can they use it
No,
for
this
all
just
of
has
their?
to do with 5310 funds.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, there are other grant programs. This motion doesn't include them.
okay.
Councilman Duncan.
If I'm understanding the motion correctly, I think that would mean that if there are grants awarded under 5310 to entities that end up not utilizing those funds would also would now be prohibited as well from potentially going to FACT.
Correct. And then I would presume there are other applicants maybe that didn't get awarded. So if there are some other funds that for some reason became available, they would probably do the same thing as we did this last time, which is the next grant applicant that didn't get awarded that scored high would be eligible to possibly receive those funds.
If I may ask staff, how many 5310 grants were not funded in cycle 12?
Originally, it was just the Ride Fact and one other one, but since then, they're pretty much all fully funded.
Any other discussion or questions?
Clarification. So this addresses the section 5310, but does it also address the senior mini grants?
No. This is only the 5310.
So
portion
they'll,
of-
FACT will be able to compete for senior mini grants.
I didn't include any other grant programs, and this is just the 5310 funds.
Real quick, Chair. When we say competing, that is in the application process. Do we want to also add from competing or receiving? If there are unexpended grant funds, then they could be a recipient in spite of what we're apparently trying to determine today.
Sure. If that's a friendly amendment to my motion.
If it's accepted.
I would accept that friendly amendment, prohibited from applying for and receiving any other additional funding that we'd amended portion.
And or receiving.
and or receiving. Thank you. So I don't know if I've got it. Do I have the second to my motion approve that amendment? And so by unanimous consent, do we have that amendment approved?
Can we see it? I'm confused as
Okay,
to,
so they're adding that on. Yes,
Yeah.
but Councilmember Moreno, go ahead.
I want to see it.
Okay.
That's first and foremost.
They're fast. They just got it. Yeah.
Okay. Did they make the amendment already?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh,
okay.
it's by unanimous consent. So if anyone wanted to object to it, they could. But if
I don't know
the
what the
body
amendment
has no
is.
objection, it'll be amended.
Or receiving and or receiving. Gotcha.
Councilman Lincoln.
You know, without knowing the basis for it, then I would object to the or receiving, because the way that I'm looking at it is they're not allowed to apply for those grants. If we have all the grants funded, or they're all funded and then one forfeits it and we have excess funds, I think the Transportation Committee or the board should be able to do whatever they want with those funds. Include, you know, and that might include doing a special award to FACT or some other entity. So not being able to compete for it is a pretty strong prohibition that they're not going to be in the original pool and be awarded any funds. And I thought that was the intent of the motion. After that, if there's funds that are not allocated and 6 months later, this committee or the board on a staff recommendation decides they should be allocated somewhere, I don't think get the point of tying their hands in regard to that right now.
Sure, I understand your comment. I guess my comment would be, RIFAC would essentially be granted a guaranteed amount from those funds. But getting that guarantee, there should be the understanding that, gee, these other organizations that do compete, they should be more in line for any additional funds that becomes available. So I'm sure the other organizations would also be able to make a good use of those funds should they become available. It just provides, I think, more consideration for the other organizations having to compete for less funds, knowing that they would get any additional funds that may come in the future.
So Council, I'm not sure, you mentioned something about unanimous consent and objecting from the body unanimously.
Sure. So that friendly amendment was not accepted. If you want to take a vote of the body on the amendment to the amendment,
I understand.
could do that.
Sure. So any other comments on the friendly amendment? If not, let's vote on the friendly amendment itself, whether we want to accept that into my motion.
This is the friendly amendment.
Just the change to the amendment that was, change to my motion. Yeah. We need to re-enter. So please vote again. Yeah, please vote again.
That motion does pass with 7 yeses, 2 noes, and 1 absence.
So we have a motion that has been amended. The amendment has been approved. Are we ready to go vote? Councilman Moreno.
I'd like to make a few comments, and first and foremost, I want to thank staff. I know this was very difficult, and this has been a discussion well before my time here at Transportation Committee. During the Transportation Committee in February, though, I did voice my concerns regarding the direct allocation of funding to FACT, as other agencies that compete for this funding and do really good work will essentially lose out, including MTS and NCTD. And part of what is being recommended today is for the carve out to be exempted from the maximum amount that the rest of the providers must adhere to, since the maximum funding for Section 5310 is proposed to be 1.2 million. In the scenario recommended by staff, which is, I forgot what option it is already, FACT is going to be eligible for 44% of all the Section 5310 funding. There are many providers that do phenomenal work that will be, Jewish Family Services being one of them, that literally will be left out in the streets. And 36% of senior mini grant funding. This potentially means that FACT could possibly receive 3.8 million out of the total specialized transportation funding of 9.3 million, which is 41% of all the available Cycle 13 funds and 44% of all the Section 5310 funds. Now, by directly allocating a portion of the federal 5310 funds to FACT and by moving forward with this option, I think we will be unfairly depriving our transit agencies who also provide a critical and federal mandate service. And just to be clear, these transit agencies are federally mandated to provide these services. And we are essentially preventing them from doing so. So ultimately, we'll be taking away jobs from our Teamsters. In addition with FACT just point blank having a higher cost to operate. I'm not, I'm going to say that. So I do not agree. I will not be supporting the motion on the floor. If I could just add to the fact that at the last meeting, we did vote 2 times on this matter. Unfortunately, I had to leave due to my agenda. And once I left, there was another vote taken, and I thought that was very disingenuous. And I just want to put that on the record for future SANDAG Transportation Committee members to know. I continue to be uncomfortable with this, and so I will not be supporting the motion on the floor. Thank you.
Any other comments? Supervisor Monica McCombs.
Thank you, Chair. Could you? Thank you. I was going to ask to just put the motion up one more time. I am just, apologies ahead of time because I'm just still confused about the effect of the last line. I am reading that as, in the entirety of the motion, that FACT is able to have a carve out but not apply for the rest of the funding. Is that accurate? So is that accurate? Okay. And so then to the question about the senior mini grants, how does that play into Section 5310? Not at all. Okay. And so are we doing any voting on that particular pot of money today? Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion? If not, let's vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Vice Mayor Krantz. Oh,
Quickly, I would like to comment that per Mayor Sanchez's mention of growing the pie, I think that's probably the most important thing that we should be pursuing, because all of these organizations do incredible work. And I am concerned about the kind of the organizations, pitted against each other doesn't improve the morale or the service being provided to these people that are in desperate need of it. And I think that it is critical that we have a way to analyze the services that are being provided in a way that gives us full transparency into the difference between cost of rides. And I know that was always a challenge at NCTD. I think FACT probably has some of those challenges, and volunteerism we want to be encouraging, but it's shouldn't be at the expense of the ability to analyze the services that are being provided. But in the meantime, I think we really need to continue to work to grow the pie.
And I just want to make some comments. This is a very small fraction to NCTD and MTS. This is a much more valuable thing for those, and we're talking about the gaps that they are unable to provide. And so, yes, I wish we had a larger pie. This is really for those places that it does not make it economically at all possible for these, bus system to get to. And unfortunately, downtown, the metro area, many more options, but not in the places where poor folks live in the county. And so what I see is that we're trying to hit that equity mark, and it's not an easy job, and that's why we're doing it, right? Because we were trying to be fair to everyone. And again, I think I mentioned the idea of duplicity. Well, I wish we had duplicity in some of these areas, but we are talking about very, very basics. And so with all due respect to everyone here, I think we're working hard to hit that mark. And so I'm asking everyone to support this motion. Thank you.
With that, we're ready to vote. Please vote on the motion.
That motion passes with 8 yeses, 1 no, and 1 absence.
Thank you. Before we leave this item, I just want to say I did hear all the comments. I'm sorry that we do not have enough funds to serve all the populations that are in need. This is a very sensitive item. And I hope we can move forward. And I hope FAC knows that they've been given a greater charge by having this carve out, which I hope they can fulfill. It is a large charge to be given this privilege of having a carve out from these funds. But I've studied the various organizations that provide these services. I think we're doing the right thing to move us forward in our region. But just ahead of time, but by getting this carve out, you have a larger charge to serve the county, as well as work with all the other providers so that everyone benefits with the carve out that FAC receives. So with that, let's move on to the next item.
Through the chair, before we move on, could I just make a brief comment?
Please.
I very, very much support, I think as everyone does here, trying to find more funding for all of these service providers. But again, just would like to reiterate, as was discussed back in February, that not at the expense of the funds that go to MTS and NCTD to support paratransit. Thanks.
Here we go. Thank you. Item number 5, Jenny will be presenting Active Transportation Program Cycle 7 for call for projects. Please go ahead.
All right. Well, good morning. I'm here seeking your recommendation from the Board of Directors to adopt the ATP Cycle 7 call for projects. So before I discuss the final call, I want to give you a quick overview of what the program is, how it disperses funding, since it's a bit different from other grant programs we have, especially the one we were just talking about previously. So the ATP is a discretionary program. It's managed by the California Transportation Commission, or the CTC, and it funds projects that increase active modes of transportation, increase safety for bicyclists and pedestrians, reduce GHG emissions, and enhance public health. The program also has a really strong emphasis that disadvantaged communities are represented. So there's a lot of different agencies that are eligible for this funding. So it's cities, Caltrans, transit agencies, schools, school districts, tribal governments, and regional agencies like SANDAG are also eligible. We've held 6 cycles of the regional ATP, beginning with cycle 1 in 2014 and concluding with the most recent cycle, or cycle 6, in 2022. The program is held every 2 years as required by state law. The cycle numbers, the award amounts, and everything are shown on this slide, which shows an overall investment of over $138 million directly to our region since the program began. Last cycle, you'll notice that 61.9 million kind of stands out. So there was a larger amount of funding last cycle because of the state budget surplus. And on the right side, you'll also notice that the majority of the funding, it's about 98%, has been awarded to infrastructure projects. And I'll talk about the reasons for this a little bit later. So there's 568 million that's available in the entire ATP cycle. This funding is distributed through 3 separate components, which are shown on this slide. And the ones that are green and blue are the ones that are applicable to our region. So first is the statewide component. It distributes 50% of the funding, and all of the applicants across the state compete equally. This portion of the process began in March, and the funding recommendations will be adopted by the CTC later this fall. So then projects that aren't selected through the statewide component then compete again, either in a regional component or the small urban and rural. And in larger regions like ours, 40% of that funding is distributed through the MPO of each region, and we're obligated by state law to conduct that competitive selection process on behalf of the CTC. So that's why I'm here. It allows our region to determine which projects receive funding and make sure that those projects are consistent with our regional objectives instead of relying on the state's criteria and the state objectives. The amount of funding available for each region is determined by population, and we're allocated about 20 million for this upcoming cycle. So there's 3 different types of eligible projects. You have infrastructure, non-infrastructure, and plans. So infrastructure projects are pretty simple. They're capital projects, so new or improved sidewalks, bike infrastructure, and an applicant can request funding for any phase of a project. So anything from design to environmental all the way through final construction. Non-infrastructure projects are education and encouragement programs that complement an infrastructure project, or they can be a standalone component as well. And then plans are plans that develop a community-wide bike, pedestrian, safe routes to school, or active transportation plan. These plans are required to encompass or be predominantly located in a disadvantaged community. It's also important to note that the CTC limits the amount of funding that we can award to plans to only 2% of the available funding, and that's the same for the statewide component as well as our regional. The CTC guidelines require that all 3 types of projects compete equally for the same amount of funding, which means we can't have set aside amounts for each one. And the evaluation criteria, however, can be different, and I'm going to go over those next. So to develop the proposed call for projects, we got input from the Sustainable Communities Working Group and the Mobility Working Group at their meetings in February and March. And we also came to this committee at your meeting in March 15th. The groups collectively recommended that the following changes be made. First was to increase the weight of the demand analysis. This is that GIS component. Next was to decrease the weight of matching funds. Next was to evaluate the safety and the quality of the project as 2 separate items. Then we were asked to remove the innovation category because that's really hard to measure and put into projects. Also to allow projects that are not located in a disadvantaged community, but provide benefits or greater access to a disadvantaged community to receive points. So to try and capture that little gradient. To provide points that are a collaborative effort of projects that are a collaborative effort between multiple public agencies, as we do see that sometimes. And then lastly, which was to prevent a single applicant from being awarded the majority of the funding for submitting multiple applications. So all of these changes were incorporated into the call for projects. And additionally, we made changes to the criteria to incorporate the agency's efforts in our regional Vision Zero Safety Action Plan, and including an emphasis on projects that are in our safety focus network and our systemic safety factors network. We also incorporated changes made by the CTC to their ATP guidelines, as well as updates to the evaluation process that you requested in your meetings in July. So removing rank and using average scores, conducting evaluator training, those sorts of things. A summary of all of these changes from the prior call for projects are included in attachment 1, and the proposed call with all of the criteria and details are in attachment 2. So this slide has the recommended criteria for those infrastructure projects. The majority of the applications that we receive are infrastructure projects, as you can imagine. So these criteria are used the most frequently in determining which projects receive funding. And you'll notice that the majority of the points are in the safety and quality project, which was the recommendation that we received throughout the stakeholder meetings. And something I'll note that isn't shown here, but you'll see in the attachment, and those are 2 separate components. There's sub sort of categories under here in A, B, and C. So they're shown as 64 points, but it is measured separately through the criteria. This is just a summary for you. This table shows the non-infrastructure project criteria, which are those education and encouragement. Historically, we haven't received a lot of applications in this category, and that's because most of this work is more impactful when it's done in conjunction with a infrastructure project. And usually folks bundle those applications together. And in that case, we use that infrastructure criteria to score the project because it represents the larger share of the project activities. And you'll notice here that the categories with most points are comprehensiveness and GHG emission reductions, as well as project methodology. So kind of a different emphasis on projects. And then lastly, this is the criteria for plans. These weights are similar to what were on the previous slide for non-infrastructure. And just to remind you that this is the category that the CTC limits the amount of funding to 2% overall. So because of that, we don't typically see a lot of projects in this category, but we may see some this cycle. So this is the timeline for the first component of the funding, the statewide call. The CTC adopted their guidelines and fund estimate at their meeting in March, which allowed for the release of the call for projects. Applications are due next month on June 17th, and the funding recommendations will be announced by CTC staff in November with the adoption at the December Commission meeting. Any project that's not recommended to receive funding through the statewide competition is automatically considered in our regional competition. So applicants don't need to take any additional action unless they want to update their application, and they can do so and then resubmit it through the regional call. As I mentioned earlier, we started the regional competitive process with presentations to the sustainable communities and mobility working groups and the transportation committee in February through April to seek input on the evaluation criteria. So today I'm seeking your recommendation for the board to adopt the final call for projects at its meeting next week. If adopted by the board, the CTC will be asked to adopt our regional call for projects at its June meeting. In July, we would open the call for projects and accept either new or updated applications through September. Projects that aren't received or that aren't funded through the statewide call will then be considered with any of those additional applications. And we'll go through that evaluation process from September through February of next year. And then those funding recommendations will come back to you in March and to the board in March. And if they're approved, they would then go to the CTC for consideration at their June meeting of next year. So a really lengthy process. So this concludes my presentation. I appreciate all the feedback that you provided to us throughout the presentation as we develop these, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Francesca, do we have any public commenters on this item?
Thank you, Chair. I see no hands from the public. Oh, I'm sorry. We do have one hand. Blair Beekman, you can go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thanks a lot for this item and the overall efforts you're trying to do towards best practices and working things out. And yeah, I wish I could say more. It's a learning experience for myself, and you guys are really trying to address all sides of how to work on issues, and it's nice to hear that. And so good luck in your efforts. Thank you.
That concludes the public comments.
Any comments or questions from committee members? Seeing none, could I have a motion to recommend staff?
I'll move approval.
Moved by Monica Cumry Step and
Second by Edson.
second by Edson. Let's please vote.
He had stepped out.
That motion passes unanimously with those members present.
Our next item is number 6, presentation by Brian Lane, Transportation Development Act of 2024, Productivity Improvements Programs and FY 2025 allocations. Brian.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I'll try to make this as quick as possible. Danny's got a great presentation on the Lausanne corridor that I think you'd all like to hear. But just quickly talk about the timeline for, oops, push the wrong button, the TDA productivity and what this is. The TDA, and we heard a little bit about it earlier, but it's the state funding that the transit agencies get for most of their operational dollars. I think they can use some of their capital as well, but FACT does get that small, $190,000-ish in that allocation as well. In February, the TCN board approved the estimated apportionments that then opened us up to look at the productivity improvement program and ask the agencies to provide their claims to us, which they're working on and will get to us shortly. At this point, we look at the productivity and have you and the board vote on it in May. And then the claims come back in June to the TCN board for you to vote on, and then that allows them to get their apportionments for the next year. Just quickly going over the elements of what I do when I'm looking at the TDA productivity. For MTS and NCTD, there are 6 defined performance measures that are in the TDA guidance and in the law that we look at. Those you can find within attachments 1 and 2, and it shows all the charts and how their productivity is over the last 3 years. In attachment 1, it looks at the last year specifically to see how their productivity is over that time period. But additionally, because of COVID and declining performance measures, in 2020, 2021, still in 2022 and 23, the state passed multiple laws to allow for some relief on the fare box recovery ratio thresholds that are one of the key performance measures that we have to look at to ensure that they're meeting that fare box recovery ratio. I think most agencies in the state are still not meeting the old fare box recovery thresholds, and so the state is continuing to provide that relief through statutory laws. But beyond that, as noted in the staff report, both agencies have been, numbers have been improving. The numbers that should be going up are mostly going up. The numbers that should be going down are going down. Ridership's up, costs are stabilizing a little bit, but at least with ridership going up, the costs when they do go up are cost per hour, cost per rider, types like things like that aren't going out of control. Additionally, we do the triennial performance audit, and the auditor a couple of years ago had one recommendation for each agency, and both agencies have been working with us very closely to work on the fare box recovery ratio numbers that they report to the feds and to the state. And we're working on our TDA guidebook to kind of incorporate, I think, some better language on that. FACT also, I mentioned, is a part of that review. They provide us quarterly performance reports. We look at that to make sure that they're meeting the 4 measures that they have in that, and each quarter they are meeting those, and that's in attachment 5 of your report. If the funding estimates that our staff brought back in February had the FY25 numbers for both agencies, the estimated apportionment for MTS goes down a tad and NCDs goes up a tad. And that's essentially what, allows your yes vote today helps them get their claims in June. With that, that's really the end of my presentation, and I appreciate any comments or questions.
Thank you, Brian. Francesca, do we have any public comments?
We do, thank you, Chair. We'll go to Alex Wong first, who will be followed by Blair Beekman.
I thank you for this important update on the TDA. However, and I do not have much else to say except that I believe it is crucial for SANDAG, of course, to really prioritize transit, capital improvements as well as operational improvements, but especially operational improvements, because you can build a bunch of fancy lines that go everywhere. And yeah, I definitely want rail expansion, but at the same time, it shouldn't come at the cost of really maximizing frequency on existing lines, because what good does it really do if you have a lot of new rail lines, but they only come once every 15 minutes? We have to remember that quality doesn't come instead of quantity, but quality should always come before quantity. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Blair Beekman. You can go ahead.
Hi, Blair Beekman. Thanks a lot for this item. As we're dealing with state and federal funding help, I guess, for these sort of issues and reporting to state and federal funding agencies. Good luck, in addressing the concepts of accountability. I've learned important lessons from chairperson, or not chair, but board person Moreno, that the idea of accountability and how we talk about these future funding ideas is really important. And good luck in how there is an importance that state and federal agencies, I think, are having a bit of trouble in kind of dumping a ton of new technology into local cities, thinking that's going to be help solve the issues of cities, where we have our brain power and we have our smarts to do that work. We don't have to have an over-reliance on tech. Good luck how that can apply to this sort of item and what you'll be doing with the transportation services. Thank you.
That concludes the public comments.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions from any committee members? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to move on staff recommendations on this item.
Move staff's recommendation.
Moved by Mayor Sanchez and seconded by Councilmember Moreno. Please vote.
That motion passes unanimously with those members present.
Thank you, Brian. And our last item is number 7, presentation by Danny Beach on the San Diego-Losan Rail Realignment project update. And this is just informational, and we have time for you.
All right. Good morning, members of the Transportation Committee. My name is Danny Vey. I'm the Rail Planning Program Manager here at SANDAG, and I'm overseeing the San Diego-Losan Rail Realignment Project. And I will have a brief presentation on the status of this project, and we'll jump right into it. So the Losan Corridor is a vital piece of our transportation network going out to the future. So this map that you see in the middle of the screen here is from our 2021 regional plan, and that purple line going up the coast is that transit leap line. And within that plan and in that vision, it calls for safe, resilient, reliable transit service that gets from people where they are to where they want to go. And that's also consistent with California's state rail plan. And on this corridor, the plans call for 1 Pacific Surfliner train, an intercity train per hour, and 3 more local regional trains, the coasters, 3 per hour. So that means every 15 minutes all throughout the day, we're seeing trains operating, passenger trains operating on this corridor. And if we achieve all the vision and we implement all the projects identified in the plan, we're able to significantly reduce travel times between downtown and Oceanside. Today, it's close to an hour to make that trip. With the full implementation of this plan, we can cut that down to 33 minutes. And that's really that transformative transit leap vision that's realized. So how do we do that? Well, also just to recap on the Lausanne corridor. So just some key stats. So as I mentioned, there's Pacific Surfliner, there's Coaster Commuter Rail, there's Metrolink service up in the north. The Pacific Surfliner service is the busiest state-supported intercity passenger rail corridor in the country. It only trails the Northeast corridor between DC and Boston. And even last year in FY23, with all the service disruptions in Orange County, we still were, this corridor was still the #1 corridor, over or close to 4 million annual riders on the Pacific Surfliner. And goods movement, the movement of freight BNSF service is vital to this corridor and to this region. And this is the only connection in and out of the state. All of the services with the freight and the passenger services reduce traffic on I-5 and I-15. And this corridor has been recognized by the Department of Defense as part of the Strategic Rail Corridor Network, identifying it as a critical need for national security. And anytime I get a microphone, I like to share this video. This is a bluff collapse in Del Mar. The Lausanne corridor is operating right above these right on the top of these bluffs. This was actually captured in 2019. And more recently, just last February, we went out at king tides and captured what the ocean condition looks like on the Del Mar bluffs during this king tide event. And when we're looking at king tides, it's maybe just a once, or twice a year occurrence, but I see it as really a glimpse of the future. You can see sections where there's seawalls and sections where there's no seawalls, and you can see the erosion where waves are crashing straight into the toe of the bluff. And not only in the bluffs, just south of here, the tracks cross through the Los Penasquitos Lagoon. So when we're talking about coastal resiliency, we're not only talking about the bluffs, we're talking about going through this lagoon. And the tracks right there, you can just see how close they are to the top of the tide line. And if there was a flood, there's a chance that these tracks would be underwater and we'd be out of service. And so a project that I'm talking about today will address those resiliency challenges and build for that future vision in the Lausanne corridor. So we've been busy working with the community since last August. We really kicked off a next round of public workshops and community engagement. We've had 5 different well-attended public workshops. We've established a community field office with open office hours. We've had lots of meetings and briefings with all sorts of people and agencies and stakeholders advancing. So yeah, we've received hundreds of comments via written comments at meetings and emails. We had public comments taken. We even asked people to draw their own alignments based on what they want to see. And what did we hear? Well, we heard a lot from people about considering other alignments. And there was a lot of questions about the project development process. I think that goes for any big public works project that a lot of people are expecting more progress that will be done, or if there's decisions that need to be made, or they want answers and more technical information that we just don't have yet because we haven't gone through an environmental process yet. So let me just recap the goals of the project. So first and foremost, we need to relocate the tracks from the bluffs. From the video you saw, it's under threat. We need to minimize the community impacts as well. So we have communities in Del Mar, sections of the city of San Diego. We've got city of Solana Beach and our fairgrounds as well. So we want to minimize those impacts to the community. And at the same time, as we are relocating the tracks, we have an opportunity to improve travel times. And we do that by straightening out curves and double tracking. This is a single track bottleneck that limits the amount of trains that can operate. So we have an opportunity to make it viable for our future vision of transit. And at the same time, we have an opportunity to improve coastal access and safety, particularly for pedestrians that are walking along the bluffs or crossing the tracks, which is a constant occurrence all through Del Mar. And we have a goal to preserve the wetlands, both in San Dieguito Lagoon and Los Penasquitos Lagoon. So in 2023, SANDAG completed an alternatives analysis that identified a whole bunch of these purple lines on the map. All of them are tunnels. You can see little circles where there's portal locations, so that's where the tracks go underground. They start in the north and connect in the south. So this is what we shared with the community all through last summer and the fall. And as I mentioned, we asked people to draw their own lines. And so this is what people told us. This is a representation of the lines that we've got through that exercise. And since that time, it's extremely valuable information because we're able to take this feedback and try and screen out and focus the range of alternatives that will be carried forward through the environmental phase. And this is a timeline that captures that. So I'm very excited to say we're very close to a big key milestone in this project. So you could see that first phase there, gathering information from 2017 from our initial planning study to now. We've taken a lot of public input and we've analyzed a lot of the alignments, both ones that SANDAG's generated and ones that we've heard from the public. And as of June 4th, 2024, just around the corner, SANDAG anticipates releasing a notice of preparation. And so that is a document that will identify what I'll explain it more, but there's another slide on it. But this really starts the environmental process. And there'll be a public input period and we are officially moving forward. So we'll have a 45-day public comment period. Ultimately, the information that we get during this public scoping period will frame what goes into a draft environmental impact report. And that's on track to be completed after the scoping period by 2025. And that's when we'll bring that and then by next year, there'll be public comment period on the draft environmental impact report. And then in 2026, we'll have the final environmental impact report. And that's when the board will determine or will consider adoption of the environmental document that will select an alignment. And that gets us through 2026. And at that point, once we have an approved environmentally cleared project, we're able to transition into the final design phase. They'll take from 2026 to 2028 and ultimately into construction starting in 2028, opening by 2035, consistent with what's in the regional plan. So let me jump into the notice of preparation because that's really what's next. So the notice of preparation is not the full EIR. It doesn't list every environmental impact. It identifies the beginning of the environmental clearance process. So we will list the project objectives, the project description, and importantly, it'll also list a range of alternatives, including a no-build alternative. So instead of all those purple lines and orange lines, we're going to have a reasonable range of alternatives that will be listed in the notice of preparation. We are looking for feedback on that notice of preparation. So we are having a public scoping meeting on June 18th, 2024. And that meeting will take place in the evening on Tuesday evening at the San Diego Marriott in Del Mar. And we are getting the word out on this particular meeting. We expect a big turnout. We've sent 28,000 mailers to addresses all across the project area. And we're doing pop-up outreach to drive engagement and interest in this particular meeting. And it's really a key opportunity for members of the public to engage at the beginning of the environmental process and tell us if we're meeting the right project objectives, the description, if we're analyzing the right range of alternatives. So we look forward to that meeting on the 18th. So our next steps, as I mentioned, we have this scoping period that will be 45 days. And the information provided during that scoping period will help shape how we prepare the draft environmental impact report. Following closely after that, we'll be doing geotechnical borings. We'll be sending drill rigs out to help fill in some of the gaps in data that we have for that range of alternatives so that we can help influence and advance the design. We need to know what the ground conditions are in order to complete a 30% level of design. And then that 30% level of design ultimately influences and helps us complete these technical studies so that we can analyze what potential environmental impacts there could be. So things like noise and vibration and biological impacts and those types of things are all going to be analyzed during the draft environmental impact report. The next thing on the horizon as well, later this summer, we expect to establish a community field office. One thing I didn't mention is that we are doing, the timeline represents CEQA, the California Environmental Clearance. The NEPA has not yet started. So we are working with our federal partners to identify a NEPA lead agency, and that will begin the federal environmental clearance. We want to do both. Right now we only have state funds on this project, but we know we'll need both state and federal funds to actually complete the project. And so we want to make sure that this project is cleared for both. So we expect to start that federal process in the fall, and by the draft environmental impact, have it issued as a joint environmental impact report and environmental impact statement. So we combine in the draft document. And then outreach, I hate to save it for last because we know it's important, and it will be continued all throughout this process and expanded as well. And that concludes the presentation, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Danny. Do we have any public comments, Francisco?
Thank you, Chair. We do. We have one person in the room, Robert German, if you'd like to step up to the podium, and then we will go to Zoom and start with Alex Wong.
Everybody got a flyer? Because is this what SANDAG wants? Is a hub with trains, planes, trucks, and roads. Miramar is the place. But if this is not what SANDAG wants, then I won't come in anymore, because this is what I'm working on. And this will be in 50 years. This is what, we can't afford anything else but this. And the grant money is available on the bipartisan infrastructure plan to build this. We would be an example basically for the world, but especially on the West Coast. So you can speak up and tell me, no, German, this we're not even considering. Or when we borrow the money or we take the grant money, we're going to try and do this. And then I will show you, well, I'm out of time. I will suggest stuff, and I love some of your slides. Planes, trucks, and trains, I love them. So I need some feedback too. That's it. Thanks.
Our next speaker will be Alex Wong, followed by Blair Beekman.
It's exciting that SANDAG is aiming for an incredible 33-minute travel time between Oceanside and downtown. However, SANDAG can achieve even higher travel time savings by increasing proposed coaster frequency from 20 minutes to 15 or even 12 minutes. This would save coaster passengers an average of 2.5 minutes, nearly as much as the 3-minute time savings achieved by the Del Mar Tunnel. Yes, the Del Mar Tunnel is necessary due to coastal erosion. However, the 2.5-minute time savings from higher frequencies will benefit every single trip taken on the coaster along any point of the line, while only passengers who pass through Del Mar will benefit from the Del Mar Tunnel's time savings. A good model for coaster would be Caltrain, which will run catenary electrical multiple units whose superior acceleration will not only shave end-to-end travel times by up to 25 minutes, but will also allow trains in each direction to run as closely as 7.5 minutes apart from each other, on top of handling California high-speed rail trains.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Blair Beekman, followed by the person with the username ending in 2463.
Hi, Blair Beekman. Thanks a lot for this item. Thank you that you are considering different options. As beautiful as the options have been, the use has been with the tracks by the coast side. And it's very sad to have to give it up, but it does seem more practical at this time to be considering different options. And thank you that this item does that. And I remember in a previous presentations here that board persons talked about drainage issues that need to definitely be a part of the future of whatever the future of the cliff area is. So good luck with this issue. And thank you very much for its item and how we can talk about it in these terms. Thanks.
I think our next speaker will be the person with the username ending in 2463. You can go ahead when you're ready. The full name that I see is USPB 672463. You're self-muted at the moment if you'd like to start. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties to that person. If you'd like to email your comments to me at clerk@sandag.org, I'd be happy to distribute them to the members on your behalf. And Chair, that concludes the public commenters.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions from committee members? I don't. Oh, I'm sorry, Dave Zito.
Yeah, just a quick question, which is with the EIR, what's the process to get to the number of alignment options that are going to be studied by the EIR? Do we know how many options are going to be, or how are we going to determine how many options will be studied in the environmental document?
Yeah, we have Keith Gray here, who's our environmental compliance manager. And do you want to take that one, or you want me to?
I can go ahead.
Okay.
Hello, Transportation Committee. So right now we have all that spaghetti that Danny showed up on the map, and that's a lot of options. We can't take all that through environmental process. So there's a way we call it screening. We screen it down to something that's more reasonable. And that's what the team's doing right now. There's very prescriptive ways of doing that under the California Environmental Quality Act. Projects that meet the goals and objectives of the projects. Is it engineering feasible? The environmental impacts. So there's kind of like a process to go through to bring it down to a range, 3 type of alternatives to bring forward. And that's the start. Then we say public, other state and federal agencies, what do you think about these alternatives that we're bringing forward? And then we get feedback from them, and then we refine those alternatives.
Okay, yeah. Well, I just know that, as you mentioned, there have been a lot of options that have been presented by members of the public or other entities or agencies. So when we come forward with the 3 that you're maybe suggesting, there'll be analysis provided as to why the other ones were not chosen, I assume.
We'll have a screening report, as it's called,
yeah.
and it's going to be a quite thick document that details all that spaghetti and the thought process that went through to screen it down.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Vice Chair Kranz.
Can we, is it possible to get the slides back up on the screen? I'd like to start at slide 2. I have lived the last 10 years or so heavily involved in transit and specifically rail as a member of the North County Transit District Board. The city of Encinitas is, well, actually Oceanside, Carlsbad, Encinitas, Solana Beach, Del Mar are all impacted by the Lausanne Rail Corridor in very significant ways. And the thing that kills me about our conversation is that that particular purple line that runs from the northern part of the county through to the downtown San Diego was built in the 1880s. And so the idea that we are trying to solve this problem in Del Mar with our brains totally focused on that 1880s path, that corridor is super frustrating. And so it is my hope that as we advance the environmental process and the NOP, that we make sure we think outside the box a little bit. I can recall when the 5 Big Moves program was in its infancy, and there was a lot of really exciting talk about rail. There was a proposal to put commuter rail in the Interstate 5 corridor. And I was generally supportive of that until it was learned that there was no plan to remove freight rail from the existing corridor. So essentially what Encinitas would have in all the coastal cities would be 2 trains running essentially parallel at various times. And so since then, I have been focused on how can we address the issues related to freight rail so that the options for I-5 corridor rail could be expanded because once you lose the freight rail, you have the grades that the commuter rail and intercity rail can run can be steeper. So I go back to renew the idea that that yellow line on that map, which is California High-Speed Rail, is a much better alignment for freight rail. And the freight rail guys, BNSF, they were brilliant. I give them a lot of credit. What those guys did is they dumped the coastal corridor through San Clemente on the OCTA. They got NCTD and MTS to buy the rest of the coastal rail corridor. So they put the requirement to keep that freight rail line open on the backs of the taxpayers. And it was a brilliant move. It's really proven to be very successful. And right now, the notion of tunneling through Del Mar is, $5 billion consideration. It's probably going to go much higher than that by the time it's done. I think investing in a way for freight rail to get to, say, Barstow or up north, where BNSF is investing $1.5 million by going up the inland corridor through the 15, where that yellow is, would be much smarter. So I will be actively involved in the NOP process. I think it's important that we make sure the public is aware that the 18th of June is a dark day for the fairgrounds, because hosting this in Del Mar on the day of the fair would be pretty silly, but I see you've managed to avoid that. Make sure people know that. On slide 3, you say the busiest state-supported intercity passenger rail corridor in the nation. And I think that you're not counting the Northeast corridor because it's not state-supported. Is that? Yeah, that's kind of a tricky little addition there. The slide 8 has a picture and it mentions coastal access and safety. And while I recognize the city of Del Mar's residents and the visitors to that city need improved coastal access and safety when it comes to the railroad, don't forget those of us, other cities that have the Lausanne corridor, we have coastal access needs as well. We also have grade separation needs that are significant. And so the notion that we're going to improve coastal access for the folks in Del Mar before we address the issues of other coastal cities, I hope we seriously consider that. I recognize that there is some coastal access money that was required by the Coastal Commission for the seawalls, but going beyond what was required is, I think, inappropriate. So looking forward to this, the slide that slide number 11 that goes through the process, I see that defining the project is, what is the length of that?
So it's basically what you saw on the map there. So connecting, but it's the defining the length of the project is the question.
It says notice of preparation developed and released for comment, and it says that's defining the project. And it's in 2024. I noticed that the public input is 45 days. Is that the NOP comment period? But when will the 45-day clock start? On June 4th?
June 4th, we'll release the NOP. That starts the 45-day clock.
Okay, so wanted to be clear on that. All right. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions from committee members? I have a few for Danny or Keith. This is a huge project and so important to our community. I don't know if you know of the data that came out of a feasibility study between that Caltrans did. It was under for the Miramar Tunnel. And I'm happy to be familiar with that particular study since I was with the organization that forced Caltrans to do that. And there was also a EIR that was done 15 or more years, maybe 20 years ago on Lausanne corridor that Caltrans was very much involved with, which copies of that EIR disappeared from Caltrans library, but we found it. Both of these studies show how important the rail corridor is, but also how much of a savings it would be for not only the public, but also for the private people who commute up and down this corridor. In this case, maybe commuters from our coastal cities in our county to downtown, saving up to $350 a month if they had a rail option. In this case, just if we do the Miramar Tunnel, the other big Miramar. And I'm hoping that as you go forward with this project, you show that if we are able to make these improvements, double tracking as well as higher speed, that more people will use it, and that those who use it would not only have more time on their hands because they don't have to be driving, but they would also be saving lots of money. And I think that's with our current costs or even the projected costs. So I think that's the important thing that we forget, that these rail projects not only are better for the environment, many ways better overall for our communities, particularly in terms of reducing health impacts, but also a cost savings to users. So ultimately, there are huge savings to our region. And as far as the inland route, Mayor Krantz, you're right, we need the high-speed rail, but we still need a rail system to service the coastal cities quickly as a commuter rail as well. So I'm for both. And we do both, and we do move quickly on both. Any other comments or questions? There's a gentleman in the audience, and I'm sorry, we don't normally take questions or comments at the beginning, but I'll be around, and these guys will be around afterwards to receive your comments afterwards. If there aren't any other comments or, oh, I'm sorry, from Caltrans, yeah.
Yeah, just really quickly, sorry, Danny. What's the purpose and need statement or for the specific, like, that you're...
So a purpose and need statement is a very specific thing to the National Environmental Quality Act or Policy Act. That's a federal lead agency. So the CEQA equivalent is the project goals and objectives. So the goals Danny went over, the 6 goals to move it off the rail line into a more sustainable location, to improve time by double tracking, to preserve the wetlands, reduce community impacts. All those are the project goals. That'll all be fleshed out with specific project objectives in the notice of preparation, which will be out in June 4th.
Okay, thank you.
Don't see any other hands up, so we are finished with this item. I just need to make an announcement with regards to our next meeting, which will be June 21st at 9 o'clock. I want to encourage, this will be a joint meeting with 2 other committees here at SANDAG. We're going to address a number of issues from flexible fleets to trying to reduce the health impacts from the transportation systems that we have in our region. So thank you very much for a great meeting, and we're finished at noon. Meeting is adjourned.